down. For the small minority of people here who I haven't yet had the pleasure of meeting, my name is Joe Wolfson. I'm the OUJLIC Rabbi downtown, privileged to live and work here for the last 6 years, privileged to have wonderful relationships with so many communities downtown, with 6th Street, with others. It's lovely to see everyone here. Was privileged to have a warm, close relationship with Rabbi Sachs professionally and personally. And also very privileged to have wonderful friendship and relationship with Professor Moshe Halbertal. Professor Halbertal splits his time between Yerushalayim, Jerusalem, and New York. In Israel, he is Professor of Jewish Thought and Philosophy at Hebrew University. Here at NYU, he is the Gruss Professor of Law at NYU's Law School. More than that, he is a friend of our community, written many, many wonderful books, which I can highly recommend. A week or two ago, I was speaking to Joanna Benarosh, who is the director for many years of Rabbi Sachs's office and now of the Legacy Trust. And I was talking to her, telling her about the event we were going to put together. And I mentioned that Professor Halbertal was going to attend, and she said, you know, last October 2020, Rabbi Sachs and Professor Halbertal were due to do an event together through the National Library of Israel, part of a series that Professor Halbertal was running, speaking to leading thinkers around the world about their responses to the pandemic. Rabbi Sachs and Professor Halbertal were due to discuss a religious response to crisis. Of course, Rabbi Sachs was not able to make it. He was already very unwell with cancer and would leave us a few weeks after that. And when I was sitting with Professor Halbertal the other week, thinking about how we would put tonight together, thought that perhaps it would be beautiful, fitting and moving that Professor Halbertal should, by himself alone, have that conversation which they were unable to have in October last year. So this is called The Conversation I Never Got to Have. Rabbi Sachs and Professor Halbertal. Professor Halbertal will imagine what it is that Rabbi Sachs would have said to him, what their exchange, what their dialogue would have been. We're very honored. It's a big zchut for us to have you. Thank you so much, Professor Halbertal.
Well, good evening, and really thanks for the occasion and for the honor of speaking in the memory of Rabbi Sachs. You mentioned the event we planned to have. I was very eager to have this conversation with Rabbi Sachs. And I was eager to have it for two reasons that I think are so deep in Rabbi Sachs' contribution. The first one is Rabbi Sachs was a humanist, right? He addressed general human problems. I've heard him speak about the refugee crisis. I've heard him address problems of modernity at large. But he was a rooted humanist, and I want to explain that. What do I mean by a rooted humanist? I think it's a very deep feature of his contribution. Because his humanism was never at the expense of his bond to the particular tradition of Yahdut. It actually stemmed from that particular tradition. He thought, I think philosophically, and that's something I always shared with him, that if you want to have universal concerns, it's better be grounded in a particular language, because the particular language is thick, deep, evocative, and powerful, right? So if I take the example of and we had quite a lot of conversations about the refugee crisis. You take the case of Merkel, right? She was an admirable figure in European response to the crisis. And she didn't do it because of being a true disciple of Kant. She did it because of her perception of the particular history of Germany in the 20th century. It came of a particular grounded idea. And the fact that many Muslim countries around Syria, including Jordan and Turkey and Lebanon, accepted many refugees had to do with a particular Muslim tradition of hospitality. And I think my eagerness to discuss this issue with Rabbi Sachs has to do, we want to engage in a human problem from a Jewish perspective. And that's very, for me, something that I admired about Rabbi Sachs' thinking and shared with him, because I know how deep it is. And therefore, the kind of tension between particularism and humanism is a false tension. And I think Rabbi Sachs, both in his thinking and his way of life and contribution, is a testimony for the falseness of this idea, of that tension. So the one thing is what I would call rooted humanism. The other thing has to do with the primacy of halakha in his thinking. He was in line with quite a lot of modern Jewish thought. He thought that the primacy of halakha is its expression, and the primacy of halakha means a call for action. Right? Halakha as a religious sensibility rejects two ideas. First of all, it rejects the sentiment that religion is about otherworldliness, as if we have to penetrate the veil of the earthly and the material to get to the real world out there. Right? So there's a beautiful Mishnah in Masechet Avot, Yafa sha'a achat shel tshuva u'ma'asim tovim ba'olam hazeh mikol chayei ha'olam haba. 1 hour of repentance and good deeds in this world is greater than all eternal otherworldly life. There is this worldliness to halakha. It's also a rejection to what we will call the religion of interiority, the idea that religion is about interiority into the depth of the subject. Whatever is not expressed into action is somehow religiously vacuous. And I wanted to know, being an halachist in a broad sense, how do we respond to a crisis? And I was seeking, very eager to have that conversation, and then Rabbi Sachs through the office told me he cannot make it, and I felt the sense of loss that we all feel, missing him. So what would the conversation be like? And I want to start with rejecting a certain idea of religious response to crisis that has to do with theodicy. What do we mean by theodicy? There is a pandemic. There is a crisis. And at a moment of crisis where innocent people die, you begin to ask the question of where is God's righteousness in the world, right? And there are three propositions you have to put together. First, that God is omnipotent. He can do everything. Second, that God is good. Third, that there is evil. How could you work this out? And there is a response to overcome that theological problem, which has to do with denying the third proposition, denying that there is evil. Either by blaming the victim, saying, it wasn't evil, you deserve it. That's what the friends of Eov told him. Right? You must have done something wrong to deserve the death of your children. And I think the greatest religious achievement of the book of Eov is claiming that this is not only a wrong response to evil, but that response to evil is an evil in itself. Because can you imagine someone, a mourner, and Eov is a mourner? The setup of the narrative is mourning, and here he sits and mourns, and they come, his friends, not saying nice friends, to comfort him, and rather they comfort him, they blame him. I think they did they did him an indirect favor because they motivated him back to life. He wanted to die, but he is not willing to die guilty. He said, I'm not going to go to my grave guilty. Right? And God affirms Eov's position. Lo dibru yirei Eov nechona. They didn't speak righteously. And the Talmud says that whoever blames a victim in this way, it's onat dvarim. It's deception of words. It's asur. So it's the first response. The second response to deny evil is what I call the big picture response, right? It looks to you evil now, but if you had the big historical picture, right? Big historical picture, you understand that this is actually good. And by the way, I perceive this view as another instantiation of evil in itself. Because what it affirms that you're willing to sacrifice someone for the sake of a larger good when something else will come. So there is that instrumentalization of human beings. It's kind of an evil into itself. The third one is a kind of a metaphysical denial of evil. To claim that evil doesn't exist in a sense that Maimonides to a certain degree has a moment like that in the guide, Spinoza, others who say, what we have is just pain and joy. People then project to it questions of evil and good. Evil is not, and I would say the following, my view, and I think Rabbi Sachs would have agreed, that theodicy is a failed project, not because it doesn't deliver good answers. Clearly it doesn't deliver good answers. Whenever you hear those answers, you said, you better keep quiet because your answers just aggravate the problem. But there is something wrong humanly in denying the fact of evil. Right? I would say that to attempt to solve the problem of evil is a kind of an evil into itself. It's not a solution to evil, it's an addition to evil. Thank you so much. It's a relief. So how should we respond to crisis? How should the response to crisis look like? And what is actually the source of the problem of evil? It's not theodicy. I mean, theodicy is something, we have no way of really resolving it deeply, just by faith. But the real problem of evil is when evil is so absorbing, so all-encompassing, that it sucks, that it depletes your energy to fight it. Because the only proper response to evil is not to claim it doesn't exist, but it's to try to minimize it. By the way, that's the problem, deep there, that's the problem in the book of Eov. It's the death wish that you have. It's a kind of a pervasive nihilism, fatalism that comes out of experience of evil in the world, where you feel helpless, where you feel withdrawn, where you feel despair. And the question, the real question of fighting evil, or the problem of evil, the religious problem, or I would say the halachic problem of crisis, is how to generate enough resilience to confront it. And I want to say a few things that emerge out of this thought. What does it mean to confront it? Rejecting theodicy as a mode of approaching crisis. What does it mean religiously to confront a pandemic? Now, Maimonides in Ilchot Ta'anit, in laws concerning fasting because of the crisis, right? He begins there's a famous section. He says, "Mitzvat aseh min haTorah liz'ok u'le'ariah b'chatzotzot al kol tzara shetavo." It's a positive commandment from the Torah to scream, to blow the trumpets when a catastrophe occurs. And then Maimonides gives a proof text to that. And then he says that screaming, that blowing the trumpets, he says, "V'davar ze midarkei hatshuva." This is a way, a mode of repentance. It's not just merely crying for help or crying out of despair. It's an act of self-interrogation. שבזמן שתבוא צרה ויזעקו עליה ויריעו ידעו הכל שבגלל מעשיהם הרעים הוא רע להם. That they should know that such a crisis is a result of a wrong action. And then he says, וזהו שיגרום להם להסיר הצרה מעליהם. And this awakening will cause them to remove the crisis from them. And then he says, אבל אם לא יזעקו ולא יריעו. But if they're not going to cry and express that sorrow, אלא יאמרו דבר זה מנהגי העולם. It's just something that happens. וצרה זו נקראת. It's just a mere unpredictable event out of nowhere. No, Maimonides has a very interesting formulation. הרי זו דרך אכזריות. This is a cruel response to crisis. Fatalism saying, well, it happens. Bad things happen. Just happen. It's a cruel, indifferent response to crisis. And then you ask yourself, okay, that's what is the kind of awakening that a pandemic causes? What is the sort of awakening that is caused by such a crisis? And I want to raise four, at least for me, four issues that are part of that awakening. What is it? You know, one thing that crisis of that magnitude does, it's like an X-ray machine. You see things you didn't see before, right? The Greek term for crisis or of magnitude is apocalypse. Apocalypse literally means the removal of the veil, right? In Greek, this is something deep. The veil is removed, you see things. So what did we see that can mobilize us to action, that can, I would say, that can confront our fatalism? Four things, and I want to finish with the reflections of those four things. The first one is that crisis makes those who we take for granted visible. I want to talk about all maintenance workers, right? All those people that they're invisible in our life. And then in time of crisis, you realize how deeply you are dependent upon them. Those who collect the garbage, those who run the subways, the medical staff. And a proper response in that moment is to say, look, the market never rewards this group in the way that we so much depended upon them. There is, we would say in economic terms, a huge moral market failure. And at least there is a call for gratitude for those. That's the first thing. The second thing, it has to do with poverty and fragility and vulnerability. Because in time of crisis, you realize one thing about poverty, which is being poor is not only lack of means to get basic needs. Actually, the condition of poverty is more complex. Because what the poor don't have, they don't have what I call the margins of resilience. Meaning, they can survive, I say the lower middle class, can survive, can raise the head above the water. But one problem, just one bill, one medical bill, one debt that is not paid, there's a domino effect that destroys them. And part of our inequality in life is not so much the means we have, but it's you would call our margins of resilience to confront crisis. And one thing that at moment of large-scale crisis, what you sense is what happens to societies. They don't have ahead of time safety nets, distributive mechanisms that will allow absorption of crisis in ways that it wouldn't impact fatally all aspects of life. That's the second. I'm exercising in what we will call repentful mode of responding to crisis, which means, I would say the following, such magnitude of crisis will always be connected to human behavior. Third, this is something very trivial, the environment. I mean, we're messing with the environment. At a certain point, reality will hit back in different ways, in different complex ways, of the human hubris, of that sense of invulnerability that has to do with technological progress. And one aspect of technological progress is that with the emerging of rising capacities, there is also greater vulnerability that is so deeply connected to the emergence of those capacities. You have a global network, and then pandemics rush through our capacities of movement, and then we pay the price. We pay a certain price that has to do with environment. I want to come to the fourth thing, which for me is the most important. I mean, personally, I would say the things that makes me worry and makes me to think about a call for action that has to do with trust. If I learned something from the pandemic and the crisis, it has to do with trust. When you have such a crisis, you know that in order to overcome it, you need a joint effort of many people to pay a price in order to confront such a public disaster. And for that, you need trust. When society doesn't have trust, either with communities next to them or in leadership, it cannot genuinely and collectively respond to a crisis of that matter, and it costs in lives. You see the price. And you ask yourself, why don't we have trust? Where is trust gone? And trust is gone because of one deep problem in our life, which is the politicization of everything. In order to establish trust, you need some sphere which is outside politics, which transcends politics, that is a reference point and guiding for political action. But at the moment you leave that sacred domain, I would call it the sacred domain, the domain which is not politicized. Right? When you say, look, everything is politics, it's just a mere power game. Even vaccines becomes political. Even masks become not a safety measure, but a uniform of political identity. And you ask yourself, where does the world have gone? I mean, politics has to end somewhere. And why is it that there is such an erosion of that sacred domain? First of all, of facts. By the way, and when there is no shared realm of facts and no trust in discourse about facts, something terrible happens to a society, which is words lose their meaning. There are no more words. They mean nothing. And when words mean nothing, you don't have any trust in anyone. Everything is fabricated anyhow. Everything is motivated by power games. You know, it's interesting. When I think about politics and the sacred domain, one real question about leadership, or I would say one deep vulnerability of political leadership is, at the heart of leadership, there are two reversals. There are two deep reversals. The first reversal is for the subject. Politics is an instrument. Power is an instrument. For the leader, it might be not only a mean, it might become also an end. Say, what is the main goal of a president in the first term in the US? What is the main goal? Well, he has different goals, he or she. We don't have it yet. To what? To get reelected. Okay, say that, fair enough. It's part of what politics is. But what happens if because of that, another reversal happens, which is he uses ends as means for maintaining power? I'll give you a biblical example. I always was shattered by that, deeply shattered by that fact. It's actually a story of in the one of the deepest book about politics ever written, or the best book written in the Hebrew language, Sefer Shmuel. Still the best book written in the Hebrew language, I believe that. Still. And there is a powerful story about Shaul. The book says, the book tells the story that Michal is in love with Shaul, with David, right? By the way, as Alter points in his interpretation, the first time in the Bible, the only time in the Bible where a particular woman loves a man. Michal loves David. By the way, everybody loves David, more or less. And Shaul is threatened by David. He's threatened by him. And he says, he hears that Michal is in love with David. Vayitav hadavar be'einav. You think, well, he's happy that he's going to have a nice son-in-law. But he has another plan. And he says, Vatei lo lemokesh. Let her be a means of undermining, or of that's a way that I'm going to use her as a way of getting rid of David. And then he comes to David and says, you want to marry into the royal family? You need to bring a big nedunia. I'm sorry, I don't know that word in English. right? Dowry. Thanks. And it says, bring me 100 foreskins of Plishtim. The idea is that the Plishtim are not going to like that idea. V'teibo yat Plishtim. Let the Plishtim kill him. Now David succeeds and it brings him 200, etc., etc. Now you think the following question. You say, let's assume that the plot would have been successful. What would Michal feel? She loves him. She will feel that her father instrumentalized her to stay in power. He took something sacred, which is parental love, and made it into an instrument of power. And I want to tell you one thing, when you do that, when a leader does that, what you have is a complete loss of trust, a breakdown of trust. If someone thinks, if someone is in a war, a soldier, I'm talking maybe from experience close to home, and he has some doubts that he's sent to a mission, not for the sake of the mission, but the sake of a promotion of a certain officer. You don't want that to happen to soldiers or to citizens in times of crisis. And the real issue that we are confronting in a serious way, when you look at the pandemic or the response to the crisis, and you think of tshuva in the sense of analysis, reflection, action, and you ask yourself, how do we have to confront it? What is our problem? I would say at the heart of it is the breakdown of trust that allows for shared sacrifice and action that reduces the amount of death, sorrow, and many other things. And when you ask yourself, why is trust broken? Among other things, it's because there is a loss of the sacred realm, the realm that you cannot politicize. By the way, you can argue about it. It doesn't mean that there will be an agreement. It's not about consensus. It's about trusting the other party or the other side, that when argument is introduced, it's not for a short-term or long-term political gain. And when you begin to poison the public atmosphere, when there are no reference point outside politics, when politics is everything, that's the end of politics. It's, by the way, the end of political discourse. And for us, really doing tshuva in a serious way, following our teacher, the Rambam, I think, and I think, and in some ways I know, I must say, I didn't have the time to prepare ahead of time this conversation with Rabbi Sachs. I had quite a lot of conversations with him through the years. I think we would have shared that sensibility. First of all, what it is a religious response to crisis. I was talking about a halachic response to crisis. And second, what is it that we learned from this, I would say, huge X-ray about ourselves? Especially, as I say, deep, troubling thoughts about how trust is fragile and how important it is to maintain it, and the price of an ongoing erosion of the capacity to trust one another, so we can together confront a human problem. So I want to offer these thoughts in memory of Rabbi Sachs, and in a sense of expressing, I would say, for me, and I think for many of us, a loss of a certain voice, so precious and so important in Jewish world, that we try to, in this moment of gathering, echo or give an expression to that loss. Yehi zichro baruch. And thank you for having this event and for having me here. Thanks.